Chapter 23, Going Up. Oddly enough, although the growing United States had lots of land to spare, the most distinctive American way for a city to grow was not to stretch out. After the Civil War, Americans began using their own know-how, together with materials and know-how from all over the world, to stretch their cities up. Although some Americans were moving to the suburbs, more people than ever before wanted to live and work right in the center. Businessmen wanted to be where the action was, and many people who could afford to live in the suburbs still preferred to live downtown. With all kinds of construction, the tallest buildings had seldom been over 5 or 6 stories high. Two problems had to be solved before buildings could go higher. The first problem, how to get the people up and down, was beginning to be solved even before the Civil War. In a few luxury hotels, elevators carried guests up to the 5th and 6th floors, and in some early department stores the elevator was an attractive curiosity. But people thought elevators were dangerous. They feared that if the rope holding the elevator cage should break, the passengers would drop to their death. Elisha Graves Otis found a way to dispel the fears. He invented a simple automatic safety brake. If the rope broke, instead of the cage plummeting to the bottom, the brake would automatically clamp the cage safely to the sides. Otis staged a demonstration in New York in 1854. He rode the elevator to the top, then an attendant cut the rope while the breathless spectators watched. As designed, Otis's safety brake swiftly clamped the edge in place, and Otis bowed nonchalantly to the crowd. Otis's early steam-driven elevators moved only 50 feet a minute, about half a mile an hour. To Americans, who now could speed along on railroads at 40 miles an hour, this steam-driven vertical railway seemed to climb like a snail. But by 1880, the improved hydraulic elevators pushed by water pressure in a long vertical cylinder were climbing at 600 feet a minute. By 1892, electric motors were carrying passengers up so fast that they felt their ears were being stopped. The second problem, how to hold up the building, began to be solved when James Bogardus and others who used cast iron for their buyers' palaces. It was no longer necessary to build a tall building like a pyramid with thick supporting walls on the lower floors. Cast iron construction helped the department stores keep the lower floors wide open. They enjoyed broad vistas and narrow pillars. They also permitted attractive show windows to the outside. But iron construction also made it possible to build higher and higher. Soon, an 8-story building like Stuart's cast iron palace seemed small. The time was ripe for the skyscraper. Of course, Bogardus was only dreaming when he forecast buildings 10 miles high, but he was not far wrong when he told American builders that only the sky would be their limit. Bogardus himself constructed one of the first buildings of true skyscraper design. Its frame was a tall iron cage. If the cage was strong and rigid and solidly anchored at the bottom, then the building could go up high without needing thick walls at the bottom. They called it skeleton construction because its own rigid skeleton held the building up. The first time Bogardus actually tried this, his structure did not have any rooms at all. It was a skeleton-framed tower for an ammunition factory. In those days, manufacturers made lead shot by pouring molten lead through a sieve inside a high tower. The little liquid balls of lead dripped through a few at a time. As these plummeted down through the air, they became naturally rounded, and as they fell into the tank of water at the bottom, they hardened into their rounded shape, ready for use in a rifle or cannon. In 1855, when the McCullough Shot and Lead Company needed a new shot tower in New York City, Bogardus gave them his radical new design. He built them an octagonal iron tower 8 stories high. A tall iron cage, it needed no filled-in, weight-bearing walls to hold it up. Yet it was strong. When the builders covered the openings in the iron frame with brick, the structure was just as strong as if they had built it of a heavy column stone. But it was one thing to build a shot tower. It was quite another to trust the lives of hundreds to such a newfangled way of building. One of the first attempts occurred in Chicago, where William LeBaron Jenney served as the pioneer. An adventurous man of wide experience, he had helped build a railroad across Panama before there was any canal. In the Civil War, he served on General Sherman's staff as an engineer. In 1884, when the home insurance company decided to construct a new office building in Chicago, they gave him the job. Jenny, who had probably heard of Bogardus's shot towers built 20 years before, decided to use an iron skeleton himself. He completed his building in the next year. Even before Jenny finished his first skyscraper, a new and better material, steel, came along. Jenny framed the first 6 floors of the home insurance building with wrought iron. The top 3 stories he framed in steel. Steel, like wrought iron, was made almost entirely from iron ore, but steel was far superior. It was easy to shape wrought iron into beams and connecting plates because it bent easily. But wrought iron was not ideal for a skyscraper frame because it bent too easily. Steel was the answer, and it was steel that made higher and higher American skyscrapers possible. Though men had known how to make steel for centuries, the process had been difficult and time-consuming. As a result, steel was so expensive that people used it only for small objects. Blacksmiths made the swords used by knights in the Middle Ages by endlessly hammering, reheating, and then again hammering the blades. Until the mid-1800s, this was the usual way to harden iron to make it into steel. Then an Englishman, Henry Bessemer, invented a new mass-production steel furnace. By blowing air through the molten iron mass, he was able to burn carbon out of it much more quickly, and now it was possible to produce 100 tons of steel from a single furnace in 12 hours. Though the English invented the process, before the end of the 1800s, the United States led the world in steel production. It was producing almost twice as much steel as Great Britain was. Better, cheaper steel meant more tall buildings. New York soon followed Jenny's example. The skeleton system was especially useful for building high structures on the tiny lots of crowded Manhattan Island. In 1888, an architect named Bradford Gilbert was asked to design an 11-story building on Broadway. The lot was only 25 feet wide and 103 feet deep. Gilbert could not use old-fashioned heavy masonry for the building because the ground floor walls would have been too thick to create enough space even for a small room. And so he adopted steel and designed the first true iron skeleton building in New York City. At first, the building inspectors refused a building permit for Gilbert's tower building because they believed that a building like that could not possibly stand up. Even after he had finished building it, Gilbert had to demonstrate his confidence in the structure by taking the offices at the very top for himself. Once he did, however, the age of the skyscraper had arrived. 25 years later, on the night of April 24, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson pressed a button in Washington that lit the tallest habitable building in the world, the Woolworth Building in downtown Manhattan. The Woolworth Building was 55 stories tall and rose 760 feet to the base of a towering flagpole. It was a monument to the American go-getter. The Woolworth Building was the biggest advertisement in the world. It advertised the success of Frank W. Woolsworth, who had begun 30 years before as a poor farm boy in upstate New York. His empire of 5 and 10-cent stores with their brilliant red and gold storefronts now covered the nation. The biggest building in the world had been built from selling millions of little things. In that very year, the 611 Woolworth stores sold 27,576,000 pairs of hosiery, 12,000 gross, 1 gross equals 12 dozen, of mousetraps, 300,000 gross of clothespins, 10,000 gross of tin toys, 3,000 gross of baby pacifiers, 368,000 gross of pearl buttons, and 186 tons of hairpins. Frank Woolworth wanted an office grand enough to go with the building. On a European tour in 1913, he selected the design of the Empire Room of Napoleon's palace in Paris for the handsomest office in the country, and possibly the world. For the Napoleon American merchants, why not an office that was truly imperial? And beside his desk, he placed a bust of Napoleon. Skyscrapers still went up and up. Above the Woolworth Building rose the Chrysler Building in 1930. Then in 1931 came the Empire State Building, with its 105 stories reaching up 1,250 feet, almost twice as high as the Woolworth Building. It long remained the highest structure in the world.